Look at a map of the Baltic Sea. You will find a small rectangle of Russian territory sitting hundreds of kilometers away from the rest of the country. To reach it overland from Moscow, you have to cross at least 2 international borders. But look at the countries wrapped around it. Every single one belongs to the NATO alliance. A piece of Russian land is completely encircled by Russia's main geopolitical rival. Beneath its cold, gray shoreline lies the richest deposit of fossilized tree resin on Earth. 9 out of every 10 pieces of amber in the world come from this small stretch of sand. Yet layered directly on top of that quiet coastline is one of the highest concentrations of military hardware on the continent. Geography has isolated this territory, turning it into a heavily armed flashpoint where neither side has the physical space to back down. For almost 800 years, this land was unmistakably German. Founded by crusading knights in 1255, the city of Konigsberg was the cultural center of Prussia, a place of red brick cathedrals and busy harbor cranes, where the philosopher Immanuel Kant lived his entire life. That identity was erased in 1945. As the Allies divided a defeated Germany, Joseph Stalin demanded the northern third of East Prussia. He wanted a warm-water naval gateway to the Baltic Sea that wouldn't freeze over in winter, arguing the land was payment for the millions of Soviet lives lost during the Nazi invasion. The Western Allies agreed. Between 1947 and 1948, the surviving German population was entirely expelled westward. New arrivals, Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians, were brought in to replace them. The ruins were cleared, the German street signs were taken down, and the city was renamed Kaliningrad after Soviet official Mikhail Kalinin. It became a fully integrated region of the vast Soviet Empire. Then the empire dissolved. In 1991, the Soviet republics stretching along the Baltic coast declared their independence. The landmass that once connected Kaliningrad to Moscow was suddenly sovereign territory. Overnight, an integrated military region became an exclave, a fragment of a nation physically cut off from the main body, marooned hundreds of kilometers beyond its own borders. Today, this territory fulfills the exact function Stalin envisioned. Baltiek's ice-free port serves as permanent headquarters for Russia's Baltic fleet, keeping warships active year-round. This map shows the reach of the short-range Iskander ballistic missiles permanently stationed inside the exclave. With a strike radius of roughly 500 kilometers, the threat covers multiple European capitals, including Warsaw, Berlin, and Copenhagen. Above those missiles sits a defensive shield. Overlapping layers of radar and interceptors form what military strategists call an anti-access area denial bubble, making the surrounding airspace extremely dangerous for foreign aircraft to enter during a conflict. The backbone of that shield relies on advanced hardware like the S-400 surface-to-air missile system, capable of tracking targets hundreds of kilometers away. From this isolated position deep inside the alliance's front yard, Moscow projects significant power outward. The encircled territory operates as the primary threat to the very nations surrounding it. The location of this firepower exposes a structural flaw in the defense of the entire continent. This map highlights the Suwałki Gap. It is a 65-kilometer border between Poland and Lithuania. To the west is the militarized zone of Kaliningrad. To the east sits Belarus, Russia's closest military ally. This thin strip of land is the only overland connection between the 3 Baltic states and the rest of their allies. Planners have wargamed the same scenario for years. If forces pushed out from Kaliningrad and Belarus simultaneously, they could meet in the middle and completely sever Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania from outside reinforcement. There are no mountain ranges here, no wide rivers or natural walls. It is open farmland and sparse forest, crossed by a mechanized force before help could arrive. The defense of millions of citizens across 3 sovereign nations hinges on holding a stretch of open ground barely longer than a marathon. Yet all of that firepower masks a severe logistical fragility. Kaliningrad cannot feed, fuel, or supply itself independently. Every import, from coal and metals to construction materials, must travel from mainland Russia. The options are limited: send cargo ships across a heavily monitored Baltic Sea, or send trains overland, straight through the territory of Lithuania. The tension over this dependency spiked in the summer of 2022. Following the invasion of Ukraine, the European Union imposed sanctions, and Lithuania began blocking sanctioned goods from crossing its rails into the exclave. Moscow interpreted the enforcement as a blockade of Russian soil and threatened to retaliate by any means necessary. A single bureaucratic restriction on a rail line immediately turned into a flashpoint between two heavily armed nuclear powers, forcing the European Commission to step in and defuse the crisis. A military outpost loses its leverage when it relies on the permission of its rivals to receive its own daily supplies. This creates a rigid diplomatic stalemate. Moscow cannot abandon a forward operating base that commands the Baltic Sea, and the surrounding nations cannot forcefully disarm it without triggering an immediate catastrophic war. The 460,000 civilians living in Kaliningrad navigate this friction daily. For them, a simple trip to visit family in the mainland requires special travel documents and border checkpoints, effectively trapping them on an island of Russian territory. A political decision made around a table in 1945, driven by the desire for a warm water port, set a stone in place that still bends the entire strategy of the continent. It operates simultaneously as a lethal dagger pointed outward and a vulnerable hostage permanently dependent on the nations it threatens. Borders are physical realities. The crusading knights are gone, the German inhabitants are gone, the Soviet Union itself is gone. But the geography of Kaliningrad remains, stubbornly forcing modern empires to navigate the space it leaves behind.